Hi, everyone. Today I want to talk about something that I've touched on before in another one of my videos, but I want to talk about it in a different type of a context. So, in my video about why the LDS or Mormon church isn't good, part 3, I talked about the role of women within the church and the views towards women within the church. And in this video, I want to talk about the context of these views within religion in general and how I think these views have developed and what the climate towards women is today, both in the LDS or Mormon church, in Christian churches in general, and in society as a whole. So, to start off with, I want to talk about the differences between males and females in the human species biologically, because I think people make the mistake of focusing on the culture exclusively when they talk about how women face challenges in our society. And I think culture is important, but I think culture is an overlay over biology. And when you see something pop up over and over again in culture after culture after culture, the appropriate thing to assume is that it's connected to biology in some way, or it wouldn't be showing up over and over and over again. And I think that when you look at biology, there are two main differences between males and females in the human species. One is that females have a harder time reproducing. It just takes a lot more stress on a woman's body to fulfill the female reproductive role than it does on a man's body to fulfill the male reproductive role. And so that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that females are significantly weaker than males in general. And those two things play a big role in how women are able to function in society and how they're perceived, because in general, women have a really hard time competing physically with men at particular tasks. And in any kind of conflict, if you're just going by physical strength, the man is more than 99% of the time going to come out on top. And so that plays a big role in women's options in society, because if you have a man and a woman alone in a room, almost all the time the man is going to have more power than the woman just by virtue of being stronger. And so, what does that do throughout evolutionary history? Well, it means that women can be seen as less important because they have less power in that way. And then you add religion on top of that. And what religion does is attempt to explain things in terms of a higher power or powers. So the assumption that comes with religion is that because women are weaker generally, that must be for a reason. And because it's harder for women to go through the reproductive role that they have, that must be for a reason too. And so that's why you get the story in Genesis of Eve being the first to partake of the forbidden fruit, and therefore she's cursed with painful childbirth and with not being in charge and having to do what her husband says, which, if you think about it, is really just their way of saying, well, look, we know men are in charge because, look, men are so much stronger than women, therefore they can almost always be in charge. And that's the way it should be because guess what? God wanted it that way. And so the way religion, the religious tradition that Mormonism ultimately comes from was set up is in the context of the belief that men and women are just unequal and everybody accepts that. And then you see references to that going forward in the New Testament with Paul saying women should be silent, women shouldn't speak in church. There are all these things that women shouldn't do, and the husband should be in charge. Women should submit to their husbands. And so that is the continuation of that line of thought, that men are in charge because God thinks they should be in charge, and that's it. End of story. But by the time Mormonism specifically got started, there was already a movement underway that was changing people's views in regards to equality and who should be in charge. And the most relevant step in that movement that happened relatively recently before Mormonism got started was the Declaration of Independence for the United States, where they said that all men were created equal. Well, the minute you say all men are created equal, regardless of how much power they happen to have at the moment, the question comes up, well, why aren't women being included here? And that question, I think, kind of boiled in society for a long time until eventually the feminist movement got started and that came to a forefront. But in between that time, the Mormon Church was started. And the Mormon Church inherited the Christian way of viewing womanhood, which is as subordinate and as unable to do everything that men could do, which is why the priesthood was restricted to men and women were treated differently. But then fast forward to more recently, after the feminist movement started, and society now wants to view men and women as equal for the most part. And so you have an interesting dynamic where a religion that I believe started off in a climate where women were just seen as inferior and that was the end of the story and people didn't question that, is now in a climate where men and women are seen as equally valuable, as equally valid, as equally smart. And that changes things. Because what that implies is that just because men happen to be in charge most of the time doesn't mean that they necessarily should be in charge all of the time or even most of the time. And so you have the question come up of what does that mean for Christianity and what does that mean for Mormonism specifically? And in Mormonism, the way they've handled it is to not really change anything, but to at the same time pretend that men and women are being treated equally, even in cases where they're not. So you have the family proclamation, which says that husbands are to preside, but then also says that they are to be equal partners, and that's kind of contradictory. And I think the reason it's contradictory is because you're dealing with the clash between the old values and the new values. And they're coming together and they're not really compatible. And that's causing problems for Mormonism because they don't line up. And I think that's happening in Christianity in general as well. I'm just not as familiar with how that usually plays out, so I'm not going to comment on that. But I have seen things like that come up where people will be commenting on Bible verses about women submitting to their husband and then will make a comment about how there's no way she needs to submit to him unless he's behaving righteously or so on and so forth. So you get the idea that there is pushback from within Christianity trying to make the religion more equal, even though originally it's not. And so that's happening too. But the reason I brought this up is because I think it's a problem that the LDS or Mormon church pretends that it's treating men and women equally when really it's not. And I think that by understanding the context of why that happens, we have a better understanding of what the situation is and what might need to happen going forward in order for women to have a better position, not just within the church, but in society in general. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please like it and consider subscribing, and I'll see you all next time.